fighting for her political life. The British Prime Minister faces a vote of no confidence. Will she survive? And if not, will a leadership challenge derail Brexit? I'm Imran Garta, and today's newsmaker is Theresa May. A Brexit deal in disarray and a no-confidence motion from her own party. Theresa May's leadership is on a knife edge. On Tuesday, MPs were preparing to vote on the Prime Minister's Brexit agreement with the EU. But hours before the vote was set to take place, she called it off. The pound plummeted to a 20-month low, and MPs from across the board condemned her decision. And if that wasn't bad enough, May woke up to the news that her days as Prime Minister could be numbered. The Conservative leader says she'll contest the vote with everything she's got. But will it be enough? Or will the UK be looking for a new Prime Minister and maybe a new Brexit deal? That debate in a moment. But first, Haider Abbasi has this report.
Is the writing on the wall for Theresa May? She said she'd struck the best deal for Britain to leave the European Union. But very few in the British Parliament agree. Even many of her own Conservative Party members opposed her plan. So much so that they've triggered a no-confidence vote in her. But May's not going without a fight.
I will contest that vote with everything I've got. A change of leadership in the Conservative Party now will put our country's future at risk and create uncertainty when we can least afford it.
If May loses the vote, she must resign. But if she wins, her party can't challenge her again for a year. On Tuesday, she went to Europe seeking concessions from EU leaders to the Brexit deal. But her critics called it a humiliation, and there was little sympathy for her.
There is no room whatsoever for renegotiation. But, of course, there is room, if used intelligently, is room enough to give further clarification and further interpretations without opening the withdrawal agreement. This will not happen. Everyone has to know that the withdrawal agreement will not be reopened.
As far as the EU is concerned, the deal agreed with May is the only one available to Britain. The UK's Parliament was meant to vote on the agreement on Tuesday, but since it was clear it would be voted down, May cancelled it.
This is no longer a functioning government, and the Prime Minister must admit her deal is dead. Her shambolic negotiations have ended in failure, and she no longer has the authority to negotiate for this country when she doesn't even have the authority of her own party.
So why is her deal so unpopular? Those who want to stay in the European Union, known as Remainers, say her plan is just a diluted version of Britain's current membership, with continued access to the single market and customs union, but with less influence. And for hardline Brexiteers, the agreement's not actually the Brexit they want. The UK will still have to follow EU rules that it won't be involved in creating. So if May loses the no-confidence vote, what happens to Brexit? Will there be another deal? Or will Britain crash out of the EU on March 29th? Haider Abbasi, The Newsmakers.
Well, joining me now from Paris is Denis McShane. He's the UK's former Minister for Europe and also the author of the book, Brexit, No Exit: How in the End Britain Won't Leave Europe. Lee Jones is in London. He's an Associate Professor in International Politics at Queen Mary University. And Simon Usherwood joins me from Guildford. He's the Deputy Director of the academic think tank UK in a Changing Europe. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us on the Newsmakers. Denis McShane, it's been about 2.5 years since we last spoke. We spoke on the morning after the vote on the banks of the Thames. You were against Brexit. I mean, no matter where you stand, I guess on both sides of this, I think everybody can conclude that this government has really made a big mess of this 2.5 years down the line. Is it becoming an embarrassment now?
It is, to be honest. As we speak, the fanatical anti-European Conservative MPs are organising their attempt at a putsch against Mrs May. They're having a vote of confidence in her in the House of Commons. It finishes in a few hours' time. She'll win it, but she'll be badly wounded, like she was badly wounded on Monday when, having told everybody there was going to be a vote yesterday, she had to pull it and run off to embarrassing meetings with Angela Merkel and Jean-Claude Juncker. It's a complete and utter mess. I defer to my two distinguished British colleagues, but it's nothing like this has been seen in my lifetime. I'd say in the last 100 years, you probably have to go back a couple of centuries to see complete and utter chaos, incoherence. The economic damage to the country is beyond belief, and we haven't even got to Brexit yet.
Right. So, Lee Jones, to be fair to her, and yes, it seems as if she will survive that no-confidence vote because far more MPs than needed have already come out publicly and said they will back her. It's 170 plus and she needs 158, right? To be fair to her, during this time, all she's trying to do is get the best deal possible for the United Kingdom. And the hardline Brexiteers are saying, no, 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 you have to show more sovereignty, more firmness against Europe. They're being unreasonable, aren't they?
At this late stage, you really have three choices. You either endorse the deal that she's put on the table, which I think is highly problematic, or you stay in the European Union, cancel Brexit altogether, which I think would be disastrous democratically, or you prepare for an exit without a withdrawal agreement. Those are the choices. There's no more time left to go back to Europe to renegotiate. The EU has said it will not make any concessions on the crucial issue of the Irish border backstop. And so it's fantasy politics at this stage to think that you can just swap out Theresa May for somebody else who will magically be able to turn the situation around in Brussels.
Simon Usherwood, we heard from Jean-Claude Juncker, the European Commission President, saying no room whatsoever to renegotiate the deal. Is the EU right to be playing hardball?
I'm not so sure it's about playing hardball. It's much more about where the EU is and the interests that it has. It's been very clear what its position has been since the start of this process, and it's stayed resolute on that. So again, I think part of it is also a recognition that the UK doesn't have a strong position in all of this, that if it can't reach an agreement, either on Theresa May's deal or some other deal, as Lee says, that isn't going to happen, then the UK ends up tumbling out next March without any arrangements in place. And that will hurt the UK a lot more than the EU. So it's not so much about being unwilling or unable. It's just a reflection of the situation. The EU would like this to be resolved in a negotiated and measured way. The problem for the UK is that there's nobody in Parliament right now who has a clear majority for the path that they want to have.
And Dennis McShane, for those who want a fantastic deal with the EU, is it a bit like saying, I want to divorce you, but I want to continue to have sex with you? Is that what they're telling the European Union?
Well, in effect, yes. It actually is more simple than that. The European Union is a community of laws. It's based on laws, not political agreements, but legally enforceable laws. Britain chooses to leave the marriage bed or the golf club, or choose whatever metaphor you like, but then still wants to have get in under the sheets again on Mondays, Wednesdays and Fridays, or come and play golf on Sundays, Thursdays and Saturdays. And the European Union says, sorry, you've left. I mean, you can't quite do that. Oh, we'd like to. Well, but that's against the rules. And so that's the problem of cake and eat it. But there are other ways out of this, you know. I mean, this is an enormous constitutional political government crisis. It's like a giant tube of super glue that's been squeezed into every crook and nanny of government and politics, and everything is seized up. Now, a way out of this, and we've got an example today, 30 months ago, Tory MPs chose Mrs May as their leader, and now they want a second bite at the cherry, so they're having a second vote. Well, 30 months ago, on the basis of a campaign many people think was dishonest and fraudulent and financed illegally, we chose to leave Europe. So why don't we, like Tory MPs, have the right to have a second vote on leaving the EU. That's one possibility. Another is a general election, but that would require a very big vote in the House of Commons. There are possibilities, but don't look to Europe to rip up its rule book just to suit Rupert Murdoch and the Europe. People have been campaigning for 25 years against Europe. This is a big ideological project in Britain. And I respect the guys who do it. They're entitled to it. They thought they'd won, but it's now turning into a complete and utter disaster and incredibly dangerous and damaging to the country. So perhaps Britain will have to think again.
Lee Jones, Dennis McShane wants a people's vote. Would you accept that?
No, I wouldn't. I think it would be pretty disastrous for democracy. I mean, Dennis is right in the sense that the problems lie in Britain. The problems don't lie in Europe. Europe has its interests and rules. And the problem is the British political establishment never came up with a unifying vision to take the country out of the European Union. In fact, the British political establishment is firmly pro-EU. Something like 3/4 of parliamentarians voted to remain. So they're very out of kilter with the majority of the population. And they never really accepted the legitimacy of the vote, a lot of them, and have been plotting from the very beginning. And even the Conservatives that said, OK, we accept the instruction, let's get out of the European Union. At the very beginning, they've tried to pursue a deal that disrupts the status quo as little as possible. And the political elite is unified in that, if nothing else. To hold a second referendum at this stage would be to say to the British population, you cannot issue binding instructions to the political elite.
But Lee, I mean, this is 30 months ago, as Dennis said, right? It's 30 months ago, so things change, realities change. Have a second bite at the cherry. What, are we going to be bound by this forever and ever?
What has changed is not what the European Union is, or Britain's position in it. That has not changed. What has been demonstrated is the British political establishment's unwillingness and incapacity to implement the instruction given to them. So the question is, do we live in a society where the electorate can instruct their elected representatives? And let's not forget, they were asked for the instruction by the members of Parliament who passed the EU Referendum Act. Can they issue a binding instruction to the political establishment or not? Okay. That's what's at stake in holding a second referendum.
Dennis?
But this is forgive me, this is silly. In 2015, the British people gave an instruction to a majority of Tory MPs by electing them to form a government. And then 2 years later, arbitrarily, Mrs May decided to have another election, a second vote, and the British people took away that majority. And so I fully accept, and I've never argued against the right of people to vote in the plebiscite 30 months ago, but the demography's changed. An awful lot of the very nice people who voted for Brexit in their older years have now gone to the great Brexit in the sky. And there's a lot of younger people, about 1.5 million, who've come onto the electoral register. Only 37% of the total British electorate voted to leave the EU. There's no other country in the world where a little more than a third of the electorate can take such a monumental constitutional decision. It's not the politicians who've messed up. It's business who are on their knees saying, look, we're going to have to move out of Britain. We're already moving out of Britain. You apply your Brexit, Mrs May's Brexit, almost any kind of Brexit, that is Britain becoming a substantially poorer, weaker country. Okay. I mean, Lee may wish that on the next generation. I've got 4 children who are young adults. I don't wish it on them. Okay. And the great Brexit in the sky, that's the greatest euphemism for death I've ever heard. I want to put that on my tombstone. Simon Usherwood, before we let you go, a second vote, a people's vote, would that help or harm the situation?
Well, I think what you're seeing here is, the greatness of democracy. And also the problem with democracy, it's right and proper that people are involved in the decision-making of a country's affairs. The problem is how you involve people and when you involve them can be done in a number of different ways. And I think both Dennis and Lee are highlighting 2 different models. And it's not that one has to be right and one has to be wrong. It's that both of them have their adherents. The issue here is the moment that to get to a second referendum, you also have to have an agreement by Parliament that is what they're going to do. And we don't have a majority for that at the moment in Parliament. We don't have a majority for leaving without a deal, for Theresa May's deal. Unless and until somebody changes their mind or accepts that their view is not going to be the one that prevails, you're going to find that this impasse and blockage is going to continue.
Interestingly put. Well, we're going to say goodbye to Simon Usherwood now. Thanks a lot, Simon, and welcome in political analyst Klaus Jürgens from Vienna. Klaus, help me understand especially what the Germans are thinking. I know you're in Vienna right now, but in Germany, the most powerful EU nation, what are they thinking about the chaos across the continent in the UK?
Well, good afternoon, first of all. Actually, I wanted to start by saying I should have put on a black tie because I think it's a very sad day, but that would be a kind of cynical comment. Now, I think it is fair to say that there is a public sentiment, including a sentiment in the political classes of we don't understand you anymore. First of all, you are voting for a Brexit. You would have known that in order to guarantee a soft, or ideally no, as today, border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, at some stage you will have to come to either staying in the customs union, parts of the single market, or doing a free trade agreement. Or if all else fails, Northern Ireland would have some sort of special relationship. The Irish border issue was always hot on the agenda, but over time, during the past 24 months, almost sidelined. Now, leaving this aside, what Germany would not understand is the following. A prime minister manages to hammer out a deal, a 585 pages strong withdrawal agreement, which up to a certain extent allows both the UK and including Northern Ireland and the European Union to walk away and say, look, we sorted out this mess. Now, as it seems, some are very unhappy in the United Kingdom about this. Labour always said we are unhappy. And now late last night and early this morning, the British Conservative Party has got nothing better to do, 48 signatures, to ask for a vote of no confidence. Honestly, if I would be a voter in the United Kingdom, I would not understand the government. I would not understand what had happened to Brexit, and I would simply probably turn away from politics altogether.
Lee Jones, the Europeans are also confused, and usually the longer a story endures, the clearer it becomes. With this one, it becomes, I guess, foggier and more muddled. Do the Europeans have good cause to be completely befuddled by what's going on in the UK right now?
Yeah, I think to an extent. I mean, the British government did not work out a negotiating position before it triggered Article 50 and began the negotiations. And that was a fatal mistake because the Leave campaign was really dreadful and didn't set out a clear vision for Brexit or post-Brexit Britain. And so that had to be developed, really, through political discussion. That was Parliament's job. But too many people in Parliament fell about in hysterics trying to thwart the referendum outcome. And so the government felt pressured to invoke Article 50 immediately. And then what happened then was very EU. The negotiations started. They were secretive, highly technical and highly bureaucratic. And after 2 years, the government comes back and presents a Brexit deal to the public and expects people to accept it and to try to bounce Parliament into accepting it. That is the way that EU negotiations work. And it's hardly any surprise at the end of all this, when there is no consensus to begin with, that it is now contested. But the problem is this contestation is coming far too late in the day to have any impact.
Come in, Dennis.
Well, very simply, it's really, Lee, that's not quite accurate. For the sake of our Turkish listeners, I think we have to stick to the facts. The decision was taken in June 2016. Mrs. May made a sequence of speeches announcing what she wanted. They were very, very far-end UKIP type of insults, saying that people who believed in the European Union were citizens of nowhere, no deal was better than a bad deal, and Brexit means Brexit. Then finally, 9 months later, end of March 2017, she sends in the letter starting the negotiations. That's why we're leaving 2 years afterwards on the 29th of March. But and then she pulls a general election. She had a working majority And she thinks she's going to win a lot more support because she thinks the country's moved massively to the right in the direction of Rupert Murdoch and all the anti-Europeans. And blow me down, she loses 30 seats, loses her majority, and becomes dependent on a very obscure, extreme Protestant bunch of MPs representing about 30% of the population in Northern Ireland. Hence all the trouble with Northern Ireland. The negotiated withdrawal agreement is fairly sort of sensible. It's 3 very small issues. The rest of it is going to be what I call a Brexiternity. That's the title of my next book. A Brexiternity of negotiations going into the 2020s on every single issue, from freedom of movement to how much lamb meat can be sold, quotas of apples and cheeses, and so on. It's going to be poisonous and painful. It's going to divide the country again and again. And meanwhile, I was in Tokyo 3 weeks ago. The Japanese investors who brought our car industry back to life are saying, look, we're fed up with you children. You want to go back to the 19th century and you still think you're running an empire. We're off and out of it. Britain will suffer.
Klaus Jürgens, I know there is an almost existential fear from many in the UK, those who voted for Brexit and those who were Remainers, that whatever happens in the coming months, a lot of people feel perhaps Britain's going to be left less well off than it is right now. And I don't ask you to speak on behalf of the entire European continent here, but is there a feeling in the corridors of power in Europe that Europe's also going to be less well off without Britain at this stage?
Absolutely. It is not only the United Kingdom losing out, it is definitely the European Union losing out. Think about one of its key member states with economic might, with global reputation, with a strong international influence, not only within the European Union, but still it is, call it a brand, call it a trademark. No one talks about the empire anymore, but modern Britain is a trademark, a brand. Now, the European Union losing this will have to reconsider, where do we actually want to go? What kind of common house Europe do we have? Only recently, Angela Merkel and Emmanuel Macron raised this issue of a European army, and I labeled it, maybe this is a kind of post-Brexit trial to see how else can we form this European house much closer. The EU will lose a lot of international clout, and they are always worried there could be a second exit. Now, how to avoid a second exit, if it would ever be on the cards, make sure the European voters do not think that Brussels has sold out to London. Hence this enormous, sometimes bizarre bickering about this and that and quotas and here. But ultimately, they did hammer out a deal, 585 pages long. Now, it is assumed perhaps Theresa May this weekend will get another 4 or 5 pages of explanatory remarks she hopefully puts in front of the United Kingdom Parliament before January the 21st. But yes, the UK is losing out. It sounds so easy, it is so simple, but what London probably did not understand correctly in 2016, the EU will move on. Global politics will move on. There are many challenges from security, cybersecurity, trade, world, global politics, and the United Kingdom will somehow no longer be part of this common European approach. Fair enough, if that's what they wanted. But how could London hammer out its own global position? They might become a trading giant, yes, but what about the rest of politics? Will the people be happy? And the European Union will lose out greatly. Yes, there was always the bickering, do we want to ban prawn-flavored crisps in the United Kingdom, which was even used by some of the pre-Brexit campaigners to say the European Union wants to destroy our way of British life. Honestly, most people never took that very seriously, but it is still used up until today. Luckily, we got rid of all this regulations coming from Brussels. What they didn't understand is there is much more serious stuff. And I think step by step, it is triggering in. If you watch news coverage from outside Parliament the last couple of days, you always see demonstrations, manifestations in London. The people are fed up, to say it very modestly, with all my admiration for the United Kingdom.
Okay, well, all eyes are still on March 29th, 2019, but there's a lot going to happen. Until then, it's never boring and always chaotic. Unfortunately, I guess. Klaus, Lee, and Dennis, it's been a pleasure talking to all of you. Thank you very much for joining us here on The Newsmakers. Coming up on the program, this George Soros-founded university is forced out of Hungary. Is Viktor Orban targeting liberal intellectuals? And did members of Afghanistan's football federation sexually abuse players from the national women's team? We speak to a former player who blew the whistle. For the first time in history, a university has been forced out of an EU member state. The Central European University, founded by Hungarian-born billionaire George Soros, announced it was leaving Hungary and heading to Austria. Why? Hungary's government refused to renew its legal certification. The announcement came in the midst of a battle between Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban and Soros. The university says it's on the receiving end of Orban's campaign against liberal intellectuals. But Hungary's government says it's simply a legal decision. For more, here's Natalie Perhonen.
This is a dark day for freedom in Hungary, and it's a dark day for academic freedom.
The Central European University has been in Budapest for almost 3 decades. Now it says Hungarian government intervention has left it with no choice but to move most of its courses out of the nation.
An American institution that has been here for 25 years and is accredited in the state of New York has been forced out of the country by a state that is an ally of the United States.
The CEU offers US-accredited degrees and is widely acclaimed in Eastern Europe for its liberal academic program. But the university has been under threat since the government introduced an education law in 2017. The change meant foreign registered universities had to provide courses in their home country as well. The law was viewed by government critics as a targeted action against the university's founder, the Hungarian-born US billionaire philanthropist George Soros. Prime Minister Viktor Orban has long denounced Soros as a political boogeyman. He accuses the 88-year-old of trying to intervene in Hungarian affairs and spread mass immigration in Europe.
Nagy testű ragadozók úszkálnak a vízben. Ez így Soros György határokon átnyúló birodalma, rengeteg pénzzel és nemzetközi nehéz tüzérséggel.
The university says it complied with the new law, but without a guarantee of academic freedom, it had no alternative except to relocate. Hungary's Secretary of State for International Communications, Zoltán Kovács, says this is nothing more than a Soros-style political bluff, which does not merit the attention of the government. The European Commission has taken Hungary to the European Court of Justice over the education law. Orban has come under criticism from the European People's Party, to which his Fidesz party belongs. And the education law was also a consideration when the EU Parliament voted in September to censure the country for breaching EU laws. But none of that has affected Hungary's course of action. The government sees this matter as purely one of the law and says it won't be schooled in political affairs. Natalie Perhonen, The Newsmakers.
Well, to discuss this, I'm joined by Eva Fodor from Budapest. She's an associate professor at the Central European University that has been forced out of Hungary. From Brussels is István Hegedűs. He was a member of the Hungarian parliament and now a chairman of the Hungarian Europe Society. And we have Turkey's former Minister of European Affairs, Egemen Bağış, who joins me from Istanbul. I thank you all for joining us here on The Newsmakers. Eva Fodor, help me understand why the Hungarian government considered your university such a threat.
I can give you a short answer and a longer answer. The short answer is that the Hungarian government has basically started to wage a war against George Soros, who is the founder of our university. And, by this explanation, we're simply the casualties of this specific war between Mr. Soros and Mr. Orban. But if you want to get a more sophisticated answer, then I would point to the fact that the Hungarian government has been, for several years, restricting the freedoms of universities and other institutions of learning and research and knowledge production. And the Central European University, my university, is just one part of this long process.
Okay. István Hegedűs, the fact that Eva said that they are casualties of a war between Mr. Soros and Mr. Orban, does that suggest that Soros like it or not, is a threat to the Hungarian government.
Yes, for him, Soros, who is Hungarian-American, represents the threat what the liberal political elite and liberal intellectuals might make for his power. Soros and the Central European University have become the symbol for him, the real enemies who might still have too much influence, according to him, in Hungary and in the world. When he wants to change the political regime in Hungary, this influential university still gives students too much liberal critical thinking. And I think that's the main reason, besides some personal bad feelings towards Soros and maybe many more professors at the university. Besides this personal hatred, he thinks that this is really a threat to his power. I agree with that analysis.
Egemen Bash, this is a rich man supporting liberal, progressive projects. Are the Hungarians right to be suspicious of his influence?
Well, this whole episode is reflection of the crisis between liberalism, right-wing and left-wing political ideas all around the globe. We see a trend, and Mr. Orban is a very popular politician in this country. His people admire him, and he's a democratically elected leader, so we have to respect the decision of the Hungarian people. But when we look at the trend, he has similar traits with President Putin, with President Trump, with Prime Minister Netanyahu, with Prime Minister Modi in India, with President Xi Jinping in China. Now we are living in the era of strong leaders. And Mr. Soros, being Hungarian-American, is a very controversial person around the world. When there were protests, uprisings in Ukraine, there were allegations that Mr. Soros was behind those in terms of financing them. When there were the Arab Spring demonstrations in Egypt, in Morocco, in Algiers, in Tunisia, even in South America, in Chile, people were talking, writing that Mr. Soros was behind them. So it's a very complicated situation. He has financed a university and academic center in his own native land, but now the country feels threatened.
What we're trying to sort of drill down into and get to the bottom of is he being a useful scapegoat for all these people around the world, or is there something to it, right? Now, something that's fascinating, and we'll come back and we'll pivot back to Turkey in a moment or two, but Istvan, I want to ask you, when we look at some of the symbolism, especially among right-wingers in Europe, when they criticize Soros, we have the conspiracy theories, there's these ideas that he was a Jew who even helped the Nazis kill fellow Jews. We see the long nose and we see the Star of David and the claws and that kind of thing. And a lot of the time, the word, the very name Soros or Soros is used as a dog whistle for anti-Semitism and anti-immigrant sentiment and so forth. So, Istvan, does it actually muddy the waters where we can't even have a proper conversation about Soros and his influence without falling into these binaries?
Well, in Hungary, this charge that, for example, Soros himself would have behaved in a terrible way during the Nazi period, that's not the mainstream rhetoric of the government. The government might play with anti-Semitic sentiments when the government introduced a strong billboard campaign against Soros. But the main message was not anti-Semitism, and Orban is very careful how to balance between Netanyahu's Israel. Netanyahu is a close friend to Orban, actually, and some messages which might be decoded as anti-Semitic messages amongst his electorate about his in his
around his supporters. So I mean that the main message for Orban was to mobilize people against the refugees, against the migrants, and to make an enemy which can be used to show that there is someone who organizes this influx of migrants to Europe, and to blame him to organize this, and to blame the NGOs, the Hungarian civil rights organizations, to help migrants and to make a strong cleavage inside Europe, which might be very useful for him. Who is against migration and who is in favor of migration? So I would argue that anti-Semitism is not the major point, at least in the Hungarian case. However, it is certainly a very important and dark part of that rhetoric.
Yeah, it's interesting. In the United States, that seems to be a bigger thing. Donald Trump Jr. retweeting Roseanne Barr, making the claim that Soros was a Nazi who turned his fellow Jews to be murdered in German concentration camps. In the United States, they're accusing him of funding the migrant caravan. So it's fascinating. It takes on a different form in the United States. Eva Fodor, for the record, was the university ever used for political means? Because we have Katalin Novak, a Hungarian minister, telling France 24, Soros is trying to influence the political system and trying to influence elections in the country. Was your university ever used for political means?
That makes no sense, that claim that you just quoted. The university was founded by George Soros, but we have a board of trustees. We are right now a completely free and independent institution. We're responsible to our board of trustees that consists of 21 very powerful people. Many of them are academics, the chancellor of Berkeley, the vice president of Oxford University, provost of Stanford and Columbia, and I could go on. These are the people that we're responsible to, and not to Mr. Soros. So even this very close association of the university with Mr. Soros, although we are indeed proud of his legacy and happy to have received his endowment to operate the university, is still false and depicting the university in a very prejudiced light. We are not Mr. Soros's university,
Yes,
we are the Central European University.
Egemen Bash, Gezi protest. The president believes that Soros was involved in supporting the Gezi protests through this man, Osman Kavala, who's currently being held. Tell me what leads the Turkish state to believe that Soros was involved in trying to unsettle and unseat the state?
Well, I'm not a part of the Turkish state anymore. I'm a professor at the Istanbul Aydın University. That's where I'm connecting to your program from. However, I can tell you that in the beginning of Erdogan era of Turkey, Mr. Soros was speaking very much in favor of President Erdogan's reforms and the activities and the successful accomplishment of the AK Party of Erdogan government. But in the recent years, especially in the aftermath of Gezi, he's changed his tone and he's become a critic of the Erdogan government. Well, Mr. Kavala is being detained on charges that he was somehow influential in organizing this undemocratic demonstrations against the democratically elected government. And there are rumors that he was financed by Mr. Soros. But I have not read the indictment. I don't think the indictment is out yet. So we have yet to see what kind of evidence, documents are there to link Mr. Soros to Mr. Kavala and their joint efforts to the Gezi uprising that took place 5 years ago in Turkey.
István Hegedűs, when the Turkish president comes out and mentions Soros by name, mentions his nationality, mentions his religion, and connects it to the Gezi protests of 2013, would you be willing to look at it and think that, okay, maybe there is something to it? Or is the president just falling into a trend that other European leaders are also falling into?
Yes, I think that the Turkish president Erdogan can learn from Viktor Orban, and Viktor Orban also studies what Erdogan is doing, and they are both learning from Putin and so on. So they have a joint rhetoric, maybe with some regional or national differences. For example, what I said, Orban would not attack directly Soros because he is Jewish, but he attacks him because he is Hungarian and American, a so-called infamous Hungarian, how he said about Uncle Soros. He uses this language about him. And yes, in general, I think that because we live in this era when populism has become so influential in many countries, and in Hungary we have, and in Turkey as well, a populist or semi-authoritarian regime, they learn how to build a new regime fighting against the old-fashioned liberal democracy. Orban even invented the expression illiberal state or illiberal democracy, and it means that his enemies actually are all the features of the traditional mainstream liberal democracies.
Allow me to ask you this. Open society foundations give billions in grants, right? If it can be proven, and again, we haven't read the indictment, if it can be proven that open society foundation money went to people suspected by the state of trying to illegally undermine the state, would you accept that this is just the rule of law playing out in Turkey?
I don't know much about Turkey, but I'm sure it's exactly the same story, more or less, what we have in Hungary, using a totally legal entity, the Open Society Foundations, which had operations in Hungary for 30 years, from the end of the collapse of communism, when Soros even supported new liberal-minded politicians like Viktor Orban himself or his party, where I belong to. And that was until the last moment totally legal in Hungary, that someone who has a foundation supports human rights organizations all over the world. There was no conspiracy. It's all a fabrication by populist leaders. There was nothing illegal in that, and that's very hard to fight against it, because how to fight against conspiracy theories, that's not a very clear possibility for us in Hungary and all over in the world.
Egemen Bash, is that a fair criticism that Turkey is maybe getting sucked into a conspiracy theory about Soros?
I'm not really sure. We have a saying in Turkish, there would be no smoke unless there was a fire. There's been so many allegations, not only in Turkey, but all around the world, in Ukraine, in Chile, in Middle East, about Mr. Soros. And I think he could have worked much harder to change this image of himself and his foundation. And I haven't seen really much effort, neither on his part or on the part of his team, to change that image. He kind of enjoys being this very powerful guy who can interfere into democracies and so forth. It would not be that difficult to really fix this image if it was not really accurate. However, I disagree with our Hungarian colleague that Turkey is a semi-authoritarian. I want to remind that President Erdogan was first elected, his party was first elected into office in 2002, with 35% of the popular vote. And since then, he has gone through maybe 10, 11 elections or referenda, and he has increased his vote by percentage every time he entered a new election. He was recently elected by 52% of the popular vote, and today he enjoys even a higher percentage of public support. So I would not call this authoritarian. Similarly, Mr. Orban, some people love him, some people don't like him as much. But he's democratically elected, and we have to respect the decision of the Hungarian people. After all, Hungarian people have been re-electing him to govern them, and we have to respect their choice. I disagree with some of the policies of Mr. Prime Minister Orban, especially vis-a-vis migration, vis-a-vis the Syrian refugee crisis, where we're housing more than 3.5 million Syrians, and he doesn't want to take even 10,000 of them. But I have to respect that he wins the hearts and minds of his own people.
Eva Fodor, as we circle back to the very beginning and the university itself, Zoltan Kovac, Orban's spokesman, we tried to get him on the program for this show. He declined. We've had him on before. We hope to get him on again. He tweeted regarding this, because I understand that you guys are moving to Vienna now, but he tweeted, The university is leaving but staying. It's common knowledge that a significant number of its courses will still be held in Budapest. This is nothing more than a Soros-style political bluff, which does not merit the attention of the government. So, Eva, you have the government saying you guys are milking this and you guys are exaggerating it. Please address that for us finally.
That is a flat-out lie. The government has passed a legislation that forces my university to move out of this country, that basically forces CEU, the American university that has been operating in Budapest for almost 30 years, to close down. We have no choice but to move to Vienna. This is not a bluff. This is the direct result of the modification of the higher education law that the government passed a year and a half ago and which targets my university specifically. Indeed, we are hoping to keep some educational activities in Budapest, and we are right now working out the details of how this could be done. But our heart and soul, the American University of Central European University, will move to Vienna.
I'm sure you'll all agree that this was a healthy discussion, and I really appreciate you all taking the time to join us here on the Newsmakers. Eva Fodor, István Hegedűs, and Egemen Baj. Thanks again.
The Afghanistan Football Federation officially and seriously rejects these allegations.
And they're serious allegations. Officials from the Afghan Football Federation are accused of sexually and physically abusing players from the women's national team. According to this former player, Khalida Popal, several women were abused at a 7-day training camp in Jordan. After reviewing the claims, the Attorney General ordered the suspension of 6 officials from the federation, including its president, Karamuddin Karim. FIFA, the football world's governing body, has launched its own investigation, saying it has a zero-tolerance policy on human rights violations. Well, Khalida Popal, the director and a former player of the Afghan women's national team, joins us now from Paris. Khalida, good to have you on the program. Firstly, I salute your courage, your bravery for coming out and talking about this. And I understand it's not safe for you to be in Afghanistan right now. For those who don't know, help us understand the allegations themselves and how widespread this abuse was.
Thank you so much for having me here. Unfortunately, the last few months we had a really tough month, especially myself, like dealing with and doing my own investigation to find out which situation and environment my players like in Afghanistan. Everything started from Jordan camp in January, February month 2018, where some of the coaches abused some of our players, like mentally, physically, and sexually abused our players. And that actually got my attention to go deep down and find out what's going on and how a coach can freely and like with all the confidence can abuse a player. I started my own investigation. I found out because we reported this to the Football Federation of Afghanistan, and we found out that it's not only the coaches, but somehow it became the culture in Afghanistan, like in Football Association of Afghanistan, because the creator of the system is the president of Afghanistan Football Federation, because somehow they have built their own kingdom inside Afghanistan, where they have the high security inside in the office, where like all the fingerprints, doors, and everything, that if a player go in, they cannot come out unless they want them to get out. Some of our players, like very young age, like for example, 17, 16 years old, they were sexually abused by the president of Football Association. And when I started the investigation, found the victims, unfortunately, it was so difficult. And even talking about that, it's so hurt. It's like so painful. It's happening. It's becoming like a culture around football in Afghanistan. Also, it's not only women, but also men is also facing these physical and sexual abuse, which is which is terrible. And that's why, like, our wish and our want from FIFA and the AFC is that Asian Football Confederation is that they should take serious action about this, because it's not acceptable to anyone like with a lot of dreams come and play football and then they end up being sexually abused, because in our culture women cannot stand and raise their voice if they sexually get abused or raped, because the first thing that happens, people attack the one who has been victim, and instead of like attacking the raper, they attack the victim.
Right.
And I mean, since the news come out, I feel myself, because I'm talking about this, I can see how people are attacking, and I can feel now why most of women are kept silent and they don't want to talk about this, because they are being judged, being attacked by people. It's not, this is so hurtful. It's
Right.
difficult for women to come
out. Of course, and that's why a lot of people are hesitant to come out. Now, President Ghani ordered that investigation by the Attorney General, and as I had mentioned, 6 people were suspended, including the President of the Football Association. Is that encouraging? When you heard that, did you feel, okay, something is moving, something's being done about this?
Yes, in the beginning, I was very hopeless, especially when it comes to the government of Afghanistan, because of the past experiences that women had. But when they heard our voice and they took an action, serious action, they heard us. It's kind of a new beginning. It's not just only for women in football, but also in women in general in Afghanistan, that now the government is taking women serious. That now the government is hearing us, and our voice could be here. So it's a good start and a great hope for the future for women, that it's a serious matter and the government will not accept it and forgive this.
How do you feel about the fact that you and other footballers and the Afghan women's football team was seen as a symbol of emancipation and liberation, especially after 2001, right? Afghanistan coming out of the dark days of Taliban rule, where there were extreme restrictions on everyday life for women. And a lot of people saw you guys as a symbol of something better, something that means freedom. While at the same time, the men who were involved in that system abused you. What does that mean? Were they using you for PR purposes while continuing to harm you?
As one of the first women football player in Afghanistan, and like when I started with my fellow mates, we were the first women team of Afghanistan that established in 2007. Like we fought, we put our lives in risk and danger to get this chance, like to break the barrier to come out and play football and encourage other women. Of course, for us, football has never been just a game. It has been more than a game. It has been a tool to raise our voice, to stand for women's rights in our country, to encourage more women to stand as united. But we have paid our lives. Like my former teammates, they paid everything to play football and make a history in the country, to open the doors of opportunity for the more women, for the next generation. And now hearing these stories and like being witness of these stories, it's not acceptable, because we paid our lives. No one has right to destroy like what we have come through and what we fought. So these guys should get out of there, and also the government should punish these guys.
Khalida Popal, it's been an honor talking to you. I thank you very much for joining us here on the Newsmakers. That's all for this edition of the Newsmakers with me, Imran Garda. Check out more of our stories on YouTube, Facebook and Twitter. Remember to like, follow and subscribe. Next time, Kosovo pushes for its own army, but will creating a military start a war with Serbia? Until then, thank you for watching. Bye-bye.